Indianapolis.
Yeah, and we invite you to join the conversation. We'll be sharing your comments and questions from Facebook and Twitter throughout the evening, so please join in. Well, tonight we have invited leaders throughout the community to join us here. Back, Tony Mason is the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League. Donnie McKenzie is the president and CEO of Indiana Black Expo. And Josh Minkler is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana, which includes Indianapolis.
Sitting next to Josh is Melinda Coleman. She's a concerned community member. Reverend Rodney Francis is the Senior Director of Opportunity Youth Services at Employ Indy. And James Wilson is a concerned community member and the founder and chairman of Circle Up Indianapolis.
All right. Thank you all so much for your time and for being here for this important conversation. We're going to get to that conversation in just a minute, but first we want to start with this. As of today, police say 33 people have been murdered in 2020. What is causing this surge in violence? Oftentimes when we see trends like this, we see a link, we see an economic downturn. Talk to us about, and James as well, talk to us about what you are seeing in these neighborhoods. Is this social media driven? What are you seeing?
Well, I would also add that there's a large body of work out there that really talks about the influence of trauma and toxic stress on the brain development and how poverty is a huge contributor, lack of opportunities, to the underdevelopment of the brain. And that brain function that is impacted the most happens to be our executive functions, the functions that determine how we reason, how we think long term, how we delay immediate gratification for long-term objectivity, the inability to cope with stressful situations. So we cannot divorce what we see in terms of the community violence with the level of poverty and other toxic stress environment in which our families tend to live. And so those things are huge. And so yeah, now you see a little small incident, like an exchange on social media with a young person who may not have had the kind of support services to really be able to reason and think very well through the situation, to do something that a younger person who, something that you think a younger person might actually reason and come to the conclusion. So we cannot, I just think we cannot divorce any of this conversation from the level of poverty and those issues and challenges that we see our families and young people growing up in.
Yeah, Melinda, I love your perspective. You're a concerned citizen. You see this firsthand. What are you seeing from the homes and from the streets and from the neighborhoods?
Yes, as on top of being a concerned citizen, I am also the founder of the Toady Foundation, which deals a lot with the homeless and the less fortunate living in poverty, and also a federal trademark against the violence and a community actionist. So what I'm seeing is that in our neighborhood, just on my way here, my ring went off. There were shootings at 1 p.m. There were shootings at 2:30. There were shootings at 3 o'clock. In our neighborhoods where our children are getting off the bus and having to walk. So I feel that social media is a great influence, but if we don't have or teach our children or give them any resources from pre-K to high school, which they may or may not be getting at home, whether they get it or not, we still as a community have to jump in and say, this is a part of life in the world. We have to take and be accountable for our children as a whole unit to say, whether you need mental help or not, we're gonna offer this anger management class in schools. And this starts when they are babies, when they are children. Because when you do not know how to conduct and direct your anger and you go off emotions, then you have nothing but a spill of mess. And now is not the time for emotions. It's time for logic, and it's time to do something bold and make an impact on what we're doing.
Environment for a lot of us that are youth serving organizations where our goal is to work within the environment. right? And so for us, it's how do you love on our youth, and how do you make sure that they understand that they are filled with purpose? And then how do you address it systematically, because our schools are failing. We need alternatives to suspensions and expulsion, so you're not creating a pipeline. And so all these things you have to address our justice system systematically, while you're also looking at their environmental circumstances to, just work with them directly. So absolutely, I agree with the rest of the panelists. It's how do we all come along together to make sure that we are strategic in how we all are addressing it.
Okay.
Community to work with our young people. But I want to agree with a lot of what the Facebook person said about the parenting piece, because all of us up here can provide as many services and wrap around to the kids as possible, but if we're not including the family as well, so that message continues when they get home, that's going to be a problem, and it's going to give the kids a mixed signal. And so what we try to do through the programming that we work with is to engage the family as well, so that if there are other services needed by the family, that we can address those too. A lot of our partners are CWF or Center for Working Families, where they have that built in, that they can wrap around the parents if they're looking for better jobs, or if they need help finding childcare, or whatever their situation is, transportation, to try to remove those barriers so that we can get them involved in the programming as well.
For residents who are saying, quite frankly, is it working? Is it working? Do we need more resources?
Here, it's been implemented around the country, and it's been successful in reducing violent crime. It deals with two things. The first thing it deals with is why are crimes committed, commonly referred to as root causes. We've talked a lot about that here. I've heard a lot about it. Project Safe Neighborhoods, for instance, works with the mayor's office and Shauna Majors on Project Safe Neighborhoods community violence intervention, where we meet with people on felony probation here in Indianapolis that are tied to gun violence, and we work on providing them services for drug addiction, employment, homelessness. We offer them those services right away. So it does try to deal with the root causes, but it also has to deal with who is committing the crimes, who is committing the murders. On that, the evidence, unfortunately, is very strong, and it's very overwhelming. 80% of the homicides over the last 3 years in Indianapolis have been committed with a gun. It's overwhelming. 70% of the suspects in those homicides have prior felony convictions. They are trigger pullers. And we have worked with the police department and with the mayor's office to add resources to the Crime Gun Intelligence Center. It targets trigger pullers, as the mayor mentioned, trigger pullers who are firing shots in our neighborhoods who shouldn't have a gun in the first place. One thing that really surprised me is when I looked at the number of crime guns. The number of crime guns in Indianapolis, Indiana exceeds the number of crime guns in New York City. The number of crime guns in Indianapolis is 4,000. The number of crime guns for the whole state is only 8,000. Half the crime guns are here. So we have to target the guns that are being used to commit crimes.
How do you target them, though?
Through the Crime Gun Intelligence Center. What we do is we collect shell casings, ballistics. Anytime a shot is fired, we collect that. That's analyzed. We determine where that gun is and who's pulling the trigger. If that individual is a felon and is illegally owning a gun, if it's a drug dealer who illegally has a gun, they are targeted for the use of my federal resources. If there's an individual that's selling drugs, that's a crime. We don't ignore that. But if there's an individual that's selling drugs with a...
In some other cities that this initiative has failed. And what we don't want to see repeated here in our city is stop and frisk, racial profiling, driving while black. Unfortunately, all too often, African-American males, black males, are the targets of these efforts. And we know that there are illegal handguns all over the community. And so what we don't want to see are just certain neighborhoods and certain zip codes targeted. And so our biggest concern is we want to know that there's going to be accountability in place and that this is going to be executed in a responsible manner that doesn't create the dynamic that we may very well be dealing with now. And this is the fallout from the 90s crime bill. A lot of the young adults and people that we're seeing that are struggling, dealing with poverty, multi-generational poverty, lack of access to opportunities. United Way data tells us that over 45% of our families are either dealing with poverty or they're living barely above the poverty line. And so what are we going to do to make sure that people get job training, access to jobs with livable wages? Because again, that stress that many of us talked about earlier,
mentioned the work with the mayor's office. But on the other hand, if there are individuals in our communities pulling triggers that shouldn't have a gun in the first place, there have to be real consequences for that.
Well, hold on, because Tony brought up stop and frisk, and it's something that's become, unfortunately, a part of our political discussions here. Is that going to happen under this program?
No, it's not. It's a strong commitment, and I've made this clear that constitutional policing is the only way this works. If the people in the community do not trust the police department, crime will not go down. So it's very important that this be constitutional policing. As the United States Attorney, I do enforce the law. I also prosecute violations of civil rights laws. As Chief Taylor knows, as many of the panelists knows, if a police officer is violating the Constitution and infringing on somebody's rights, then it becomes incumbent on me from the Department of Justice to prosecute that police officer.
Deeper. What I didn't hear is a historic legacy. Let's go back into the 1960s when Jim Crow was dismantled. You had African-American communities that was tight. It was very tight. We built and we worked together because we was going against the oppression. Moving forward, 70s, we felt a little bit of freedom after Jim Crow was over it, right? And so that level of disconnect for many, many years, and this is a strong factor of the mental health component. That strong disconnect that was there for many years, it kind of trickled into the 80s and 90s. When we look at the 80s and 90s, we look at a lot of the individuals out here committing those crimes. It's a strong disconnect because everybody's going to jail. There's no opportunity to really advance. There's no emotional piece that's behind it. It's understanding the culture of our community to the fullest. And understanding the culture of our community to the fullest is no more conversations. You have to get down to the root. We all know poverty is equated there. That's a common factor. But going back once again to the 80s, when poverty took hold in the black community across the nation, not just Indianapolis, you see the numbers astronomically high. Look at Miami. The cartel was going there killing everybody. People had to eat. People need to survive. We don't wake up every morning with a gun in our hand trying to kill somebody. It goes back to what Tony just stated. When survival kicks in, you're going to do what you feel that you have to do. And so that conflict that we're having in our community, because we don't know how to communicate anymore because it's about survival. When it's about survival, we got to get it. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. So with that being said, if we really look at our culture, redesigning our culture in the black community, there's 1,000,001 programs. I work with so many across the city, and they're phenomenal. But the reality is when I deal with the recipients of those programs, bro, I still got to feed my kids and my daughter. It gets real. And they come and holler at me, and so we try to open up other channels. We need to look at it on the state level too. I hear a lot of local government right here, a lot. But let's be honest, local government can only do so much. The dollars that's allocated out, all the money we keep asking for in the community, comes on the state side.
So this is interesting because, James, you brought up communication, and it's not only communication within community groups, it's communication here on the stage. Rick Snyder with FOP, you've been a vocal critic about the lack of communication with this.
Thank you. So a lot of conversations have been around jobs, economic opportunities for families. I appreciate the caller who asked about the parenting piece. You know, at Employee Indy, we're pretty clear that we do believe that many of our hardworking families are stuck in survival jobs. And we have been working hard, working with our community-based organizations and with our employer partners to create some better job and career opportunity jobs to lift our families out of poverty. Parents are working 3 or 4 jobs, so they can't be home. They can't be there to pass on the kind of values that they want. They would love to, but they need 3 or 4 jobs now just to make ends meet. And so we're saying that we want to be able to make sure that our families and the community is able to offer those better jobs, those career jobs that will allow families to be able to be at the PTA meetings with their kids and to help pass on this and prevent some of this violence. We also believe that a good job can stop some of this violence. my friend here mentioned that many of these young people who are out there carrying weapons, well, it's hard to ask them to put down a tool that's associated with their economic viability without handing them something that will replace that. So we want to replace that weapon with a contractor's trial. We want to replace that weapon with an opportunity with a welder's tool to make some genuine money that they can really take care of their families.
So what does that take? More resources? Like, how do we do that?
It takes absolutely opportunities. We need employers who are willing to come along and give these young people an opportunity, second chance opportunities. Many of them are willing to commit themselves to the training programs that we have available if they knew that there was a viable opportunity for them on the other end. The chief mentioned prevention. Let's do some prevention and prevent some of these young people. Well, we have re-engagement centers around the community where we are trying to do just that with the help of the mayor's office and the city. We are creating these spaces for young people to come in and show them some career paths where we can get them launched onto some positive careers rather than seeing what's happening and available to them in the streets.
Melinda, you're shaking your head and you raised your hand a couple of times.
I want to take it a little deeper. I appreciate everyone on the panel and all that you have to offer. With what the mayor said and with respect to the mayor, Rick, and everyone on the panel, our U.S. Attorney?
Yeah.
Okay. So from me, speaking as a dark woman, I don't say black woman, but as a dark woman, and with children, my children are 30, 23, 14, and 8, okay? So if I want to change my community, now my household, I know the control is there because I'm the parent, I am there, my husband and I are there to teach our children. But there's things I have to teach my children that you don't have to teach your children, okay? And then so I'm putting them in a systematic system to tell them how to act in front of a police officer and authority and try to keep them out of the streets, out of gangs and such. And the mayor says that, you know, you have the illegal guns, we're coming forward. Okay, we have to rise as a community to say, yes, there was a time in our lives where our parents would stay, what happens at home stays at home. Don't call the police on nobody black because they're going to be dead. So these are things we grew up with, okay? But now that we want a serious, huge change, then not only do we have those gangs and those people with illegal weapons accountable, we also have to have our police officers accountable. We have to have those prosecuted. We have to show our community that this officer is doing wrong and not to award them and have them keep jobs or get on suspicion with pay. Once you show a community that this right hand is lifting off of this left hand, then communities will come together and say, hey, this is not happening in our community, and John did this and Bob did this. We have to unify in a great way. It's no small talk with the resources, and I commend everyone for what they're doing. But this is not a small situation. These are parents. There's grandparents raising children. So that generation lost gap. Their grandparents in their home, scared of their own grandchildren because they know of the. It's hurtful to see your neighbors and your children in your own family. I had a family member kill his own son to save his life, else his son will give him. So when we start at what we can do at home is fine. But as a community, as a city, and as a state, we must show everyone we're doing some on every level. Because all these billions that our children are going to jail and all this money, our city, we need to put those resources back to say I'm not playing with you, I'm gonna use you. I'm not playing with you if I know you belong to a hate group. You can't be on my team to serve my city. So we need actions from the ones that I'm not able to do it.
Right, and this trickles down, and we're talking a lot about needing the community to come forward, to help the police department. And part of that, you touched on that issue. There is a culture of fear that is keeping us from doing that. So what is the answer?
You asked Reverend Harrison, as you know, we see conflict amongst each other ourselves. We didn't talk about that up here right now, and as it should be stated. You have a lot of organizations, especially grassroots, that are highly connected to the community, and you have some major organizations that put in a lot of work in, respect the work that they do, but they don't have no connection. I work directly with everyone you can think of, and there's no direction and no connection to the community. How can you continue to advocate for something you don't understand? Let's start there. The next thing that we want to talk on, Rick, to your point, you know you and I have been going round and round for the last few weeks in regards to this whole issue. You can't put, and Chief, you know I love you to death, but you can't put white officers in black communities and say that they care. Because I've been pulled over a couple of different times. They don't have a clue. I never tell them who I am, who I connect to, and what I do. And the connection that they have.
But also between our respective organizations, it's tough to ask the community to come forward when we know that there have been instances where individuals who have come forward have been exposed in the process and then subjected to retaliation. We also know that, and I'll take our agency, for example, with our workforce development initiatives, we're seeing sometimes 200, 300 clients per month. And we know that they're coming from every neighborhood conceivable in this city. But could we be working better with James's organization or someone else? Absolutely. And so I think hopefully this discussion is maybe the beginning of a new day for all of us collectively, and I think that's how we have to look at this.
Tanya?
And I would just sort of add to the comment that was made earlier from the professor with respect to the balanced approach. We have to talk about the needed investments in the community just as much as we talk about enforcement and what we're doing on the punishment side. And I think just making sure that not only those economic opportunities are there when we talk about the jobs and making sure that it is a livable wage, but also going back to the educational system. And again, the systems are broke, and how do we fix that? And so you have the cultural issue, you have, you know, the relationship, policing, community relationship. It's multifaceted, but for us, I think that this is a good start because everyone needs to be in the room and at the table as we are constructing that plan. Because otherwise, we continue to operate in our silos. And so, you know, I may think that Indiana Black Expo is doing a great job with the programs that we have. Tony may think that the Urban League is doing a great job, but that's silo impact. And so if we want to move the needle, it has to be collective impact. And so the way that we have to approach this is it has to be more strategic with everyone at the table.
Absolutely correct. I mean, after 26 years doing this, I'm absolutely convinced, in looking at cities that have worked, is that law enforcement alone 100% will not work. If you just enforce the laws, it won't work. You have to address the root causes of crime. But I'm also absolutely concerned and know that if you just address the root causes of crime and ignore enforcing the laws, if there are no consequences for violating the law, that won't work either. So it does have to be a balanced approach.
Well, Josh, to piggyback on that, from our perspective from the community, we understand that law enforcement has a job to do by all means, and I get that. Tanya and to Tony, you're absolutely right. We have to come out of our silos. In my neighborhood along in Martindale Brightwood, I'm fighting internally with organizations, which is bad because in return, this is the reciprocation. The community don't get what they need. So coming to the table and we build those relationships, I may not like how Shauna view things and so on and so forth, but if I take the moment to really listen, Shauna makes some good points on something, let me implement that. So I'm very huge, and those who've been following me for years know I'm very big on building partnerships. We cannot do this alone. Anybody know how tired it gets at night when I'm up? I'm getting phone calls in the middle of the night. I'm ripping and running, dealing with families and so on and so forth, coming out of my dollars. I don't get grant dollars with Circle Up. I put my own money into Circle Up for many, many, many years. I get up every morning, go do a job, come home, pay my bills, and go hard. I get the crisis they're going through. With that being said, by us working together, we build more resources back in the community. We build the grassroots organizations once again. You got to have the pulse of the people, and the grassroots organizations have that pulse. If you disseminate that, they can go get in the people's ear for sure, right? And so building those relationships, you get reactive information directly from the community. You see things start to develop and grow. I don't consider myself a community leader at all. A lot of people say, oh, James, you're a community leader. I'm me. That's who I am. And me is part of the city of Indianapolis. I'm not better than anybody, and we must move forward thinking that way.
Well, you wouldn't be up here if you weren't a community leader. So take that for what it is.
As James said, we do have to hear from the young people. At Employee Indy, one of the things that we have done was we've launched a series of courtside chats at our re-engagement center that's really used basketball as a hook to pull them in. But we're also using them to have conversations about violence prevention. And we launched it yesterday for a series of conversations. 27 of them chose to come in a room to have that conversation. So we're really excited about the possibility of what will come about as that.
That's a great transition, because to conclude our time together, and it sounds like something really hopeful is being birthed here in this room. I want to end with a rapid fire question for each of you to answer. What do you need, personally or your community, or as a bigger whole? What do you need in the next month, the next few months
Our Brookings Institute data told us a year and a half ago that minimum wage should actually be $18 per hour in order to help families move towards self-sufficiency. And until we address that, we're still going to have these daily issues in our community.
Tanya?
A strategic and collaborative plan that shows how all of us coming together and how each part plays a role where we move the needle. And so we move away from the silo impact to collective impact.
Attorney Minkler?
Unequivocal support by the community for constitutional law enforcement.
Melinda?
Each of us got to dare to care. Each of us got to reach each other, and we have to come together and be strong together. But unity is going to be the key with bold actions.
Reverend?
Many of the families we serve are working in survival jobs, and they can't turn loose that job to go after training for a better career job because they need that funds. We need employer partners who are willing to come alongside employee to build out career pathways that will also not just a promise of a job, but the guarantee of a job, and support while they are going through that training to get that job.
James?
I need some food because everybody keep telling me I'm too little. I need it. But no, the reality we're working on a unique housing initiative and a healthcare piece, especially focused on children with chronic illness and disabilities. So those who have those experiences, please come to the table, and I'm more than willing to work and partner and build it out.
We have about 2 minutes left. Are conversations like this helpful? Coming together, bringing everyone in the same room.
Really important conversation. Maybe there's a round 2 in the future.
We're not going to be able to
That's all
solve
our
it in
time.
one conversation, unfortunately. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good night.